Hey, this is John Scott Dixon, and welcome to the Business Growth Podcast, brought to you by Aiden Taylor Marketing. Ready to grow? We're excited to help. Today's podcast is going to be an excerpt from a talk I gave on April 2nd, 2020. We're just going to jump right on in. Enjoy.
So I'm going to break this into three parts. When you think about working from remote, and who are the roles you're playing as you go through it. And if you're in a leadership position where you're running your own business or a leadership position within an organization, it's important to think about these in three phases. So the productive self is first, and it's kind of like when you're on the airplane and you're sitting next to your kid, and they tell you, if you need to put on, if the mask pops down, put it on yourself first, not your kid first, right? Because you need to be around. So you've got to really work to make sure you are your most productive self. And so I'm going to go through a couple of things that I do, and that you probably do the same thing. And if you don't, then you can add the good part of what I say to you. So for me, you always have to have an easy and always accessible to-do list. I'm a Mac fan. I use Apple products mostly. So if you don't, then you just need to find the equivalent in the Microsoft world or whatever you live on, whatever platform you live on. So Apple has something called Reminders. It's free. It comes with with their iOS system, and it works right in line with your desktop or laptop. So they're always in sync. And so that's my simple go-to. And the reason it's got to be always accessible, I have a project management system, and I can easily put everything that I think of into that. However, it's best accessed through my desktop computer, which I'm sitting at right now. If I wake up in the middle of the night with an idea, right, it's easier for me to grab my phone because it's always by me because it's my alarm clock. And so I can open up the app and I can put that thought in, because if I don't put it in, I will wake up in the morning and I won't remember the thought. I'll remember having it, but I won't remember what it is. So easy and accessible, and then put all your ideas into your to-do list. If you haven't read David Allen's book, Getting Things Done, it came out in 2002. I know that sounds like an old book, and there's probably a chapter or so that you can throw away. Most of it is about a system of being productive. If you haven't read that book, you should read it. If you have read it but you didn't implement it, now's the perfect time, because it is a painful implementation. Going from whatever your current system is to David's system is painful to get to, but it's an incredible weight off your shoulders when you get into that system. And so part of it is like the quote that I've pulled out here: your mind is for having ideas, not for holding them. Right? It's a super simple statement, but when you think about it, that's true, right? And he's not advocating that you shouldn't try to hold on to big ideas, because you should. But you don't need to clog up that limited cache in your brain with thoughts that don't matter. Like, for instance, I need to get dog food, right? So that's an idea that can just pop up in your mind, and you have no control over when it's going to happen. It could be while you're playing tennis. It could be while you're taking a shower. It could be during the middle of a meeting like right now. And a thought like that, you need to pick up dog food, will just pop out. But if you get good at taking those thoughts, and as soon as you recognize it and putting it into a to-do list, somehow your brain recognizes that you've acknowledged it, and it will stop doing the random reminders, which means you're free to be more present and available, and your brain runs in a cleaner way, in a more effective way when you do that. At least that's what I found. It's what David talks about, and I've been on that system for probably 16 years at this point. You should schedule everything, and it's kind of in line with the same thought of having an idea pop in your head. But if you notice over here, this is my is reminders, right? These are the scheduled things. And right here, clip my fingernails. It's something as simple as that. But, every 10 days, it reminds me to clip my fingernails. It may be 7 days, something like that. And the other ones that you'll notice are check chat, right? And this is just a small sampling. I've got hundreds of these, okay? So I want to make sure that when it comes to chat and other systems in my world, that I'm not on email all the time. I check email 3 times a day. I check chat every 2 hours. And this system will just pop up on the right-hand side of my computer and say, oh, you need to check chat. I log in, see if anything's happening that needs my attention. And if not, I check that as done and move back into my work, right? So schedule everything is what I'm recommending. If you do a good job of scheduling things into your easy, accessible system, then when you start your day out or the night before, you can move those business tasks that are really, really about business into your project management system, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. The other thing, so all of that stuff that I just covered comes out of the book, Getting Things Done. And it's an excellent book. Again, if you haven't read it, pick it up. It's fantastic. If you decide to do it, prepare for a little bit of pain, but it'll be 100% worth it. So moving on, one of the things that comes with remote is a new superpower, the nap, right? So I have this little guy here to remind me that in World War II, pilots figured out that if they slept for 29 minutes, then they woke up refreshed. If they went beyond that, their system went to a deeper level, and when they pulled out of it, they were groggy. And so I set my alarm out. I say to Siri, and I don't want to do it right now, but I'll say, hey, you know who? And I'll tell her, hey, wake me up in 31 minutes and put yourself on airplane mode. And so the reason I say 31 minutes is it gives me 2 minutes to turn off the light, turn on the fan, grab my pillow, and hit that couch just behind me. So that's a new superpower that's going to give you, there's no reason, in an office environment, sometimes you get stuck with, there's no place, you can't take a nap. Some progressive organizations may have a space, but it's probably still frowned upon. Here, nobody really knows. So there's zero stigma attached with it. Jump in, take your nap, get refreshed, and then hit it hard for the next 4 hours. And you'll find that you're more productive in the morning and in the afternoon. So just a thought there. Next, avoid paper. So I've got a little bit of paper on my desk, but it's bills. And so as soon as I finish paying them, I shred them and they're gone. I don't use paper. And it took me a long time to get there, but I don't use paper because it's just, you double touch and triple touch that stuff. So anything that needs my attention goes on a whiteboard over here. And when I'm finished writing it out, I take a photo. And the key is I don't just store it anywhere. I store it to a cloud storage system. I use Evernote. You could use anything that had OCR, optical character recognition. The main reason to do that is then you can search your notes that you put on the whiteboard and you can find what you were talking about. So it makes sense of you're not just storing a bunch of images. You can actually parse them and get through them and find what you're looking for and remind yourself. So use a whiteboard, send it to something like Evernote. Next, let an artificial intelligence note taker step in and help you. So we use Voicea, and every meeting we have, I'm not doing it today because this is a weird setup with Zoom using the webinar function that doesn't really allow for, her name's Eva, to jump in and take notes. But if it were a normal meeting, you'd see her, and I can even give her commands like something like needs attention. And she'll know to build a summary for me of all the things that where I said needs attention in the conversation when I'm talking with a client. So that's kind of cool. And you can allow, so it builds a summary for you based on some trigger words, and it just grabs your entire conversation as a transcription. So if you need to, you can go back and find something. Because, I recall being in the office environment, and we'd have meetings with lots of people in them, and something good would come out of it, but it would just fade into the ether. And maybe nobody noted it down. Maybe they did, but usually they didn't. And you're racking your brain to say, remember when such and such said something, and you can't get it. So the nice thing about having 2 layers of protection for that is the AI is keeping notes. And then you've got use of video. We use Zoom for our business meetings, and we always put the record button on. So another thing that comes out that I'm going to go ahead and jump into, but we're going to talk about a little bit, we don't need to talk about later, because I'm just going to jump into it. When you record your meetings, you're also setting up the opportunity, and I'll tell you how to do it in a little bit, but you're setting up the opportunity to have a series of meetings that anybody that comes into the conversation later or joins a team later can simply be referenced. We can reference those meetings. They can jump into them and catch themselves up. So even if a client engagement's been going on for a year, I could have a new associate come in, have them go through all the meetings, and they'll know the voices because they've heard the voices a bunch. They'll know all the issues. They'll know what we talked about and where we made decisions. And so it's a really useful thing, and it starts to make your meetings much more powerful than they were in the regular office world, where we typically don't record, where we typically don't have a note taker in place to capture absolutely everything. Okay, so that is the majority of what I wanted to talk to you about with regard to the productive self. You'll notice there's one other book down there. It's called The 4-Hour Workweek. It's an old one as well. When I first saw that title, I thought, well, that's not me. What kind of work ethic would have a 4-hour work week? Then I read the book because somebody told me, hey, you should really read this. You're doing some of it already. And I got into it and realized it's just about maximizing your productivity. It's figuring out how to do things, whether it's delegation or using a more automated system, so that instead of it taking you a 40-hour week, and in his case, he's saying instead of a traditional 40-hour week, you might be able to get all that stuff done in as little as 4 hours. Now, you'd have to be really on it to do that. But even if you cut it in half and you did what you normally do in 40 hours in 20, that's a good play. And he gives you tons of examples and concepts on how you might do just that. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second and ask any questions with regard to the productive self.
No.
Y'all good?
Okay.
I
just have a question, John, and sure. It's not regarding, I think it's interesting, some of the points that you put, even though I worked at home, there are things I haven't done. What is the program you're using for your presentation? Sorry about that.
This is called Concept Board. So it's a creative workspace, and it allows me to do things like this. I'm going to move from productive self to productive leader, and it's an infinite space. So I can build out really big concepts and tie things together without leaving this environment. And it allows me to have text along with graphics so that it's easier to understand, at least the way I think. So maybe you feel the same way, Maria.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it. I think it's very good for
awesome.
Presentations.
Yeah,
thank you.
It's perfect. Okay, so now we're going to move into the remote leader. So I mentioned we're going to do the productive self, the remote leader, and the remote manager. And they're all critical components to being effective out here. So the key points are you ought to start with blocking out your calendar. And this sounds really fundamental, but I don't think a lot of people do it. And so you've got two things sitting here. One is my thought process on what blocks are important and at what percentage. And then how it actually looks on my calendar when I do that. So when I was doing it, I thought for me, I'm trying to run a business. And the most important thing I can do as a business leader is to be working on the business, not in it. So in it for me is doing physical tasks like prepping an email campaign for a client, or doing search engine optimization for a client, or writing a social media post. Those are things that I can do, but I have people to do those. So the more I can work on the business and think about how could we be more effective in our client engagements, then we're poised to grow rather than just kind of stagnate, maybe even, go downward. So I felt like 40% of my time should be focused on the business, and then 25% in the business. I still need to be connected, because if I'm going to continue growing, we run a marketing agency. If I'm going to continue growing, I have to touch it. I have to see what's going on. Otherwise, I would get out of step with reality of how it works, and I don't want to do that. So I want to keep myself in it, but I also want to make sure I'm leaving a good chunk of time for working on it. Then you'll see I've got 20% that's flexible, and I call it sales/ad hoc time. And in some cases, like you'll see on Sundays, I do prep for sales for the week that's coming up for a couple hours. But the other time, I'm generally up and rolling somewhere around 6. So I've got a bunch of time that's left open throughout the week that can be a sales call. And I just leave it open. I don't try to schedule that because you never know how it's going to fit. And the ad hoc is somebody just shows up and says, hey, John, can you meet with me? And I can fit them in those spaces. And a little bit on that. You'll notice here I've got this icon. It's for a thing called Acuity Scheduling. So there are several scheduling programs out there. Calendly is, I think I'm saying that right, is one of them. There's several of them. We've used Acuity. It's got a nice interface and we like it. But the key to it is that I want to be very careful of losing my time. And so whenever you try to schedule time with people,